Hi folks, Florida Man here. What follows is a conversation between me and Big Gun, one of the few diplomacy players I'd call a friend. We discuss the Versailles variant of the diplomacy board game, a variant about which he is the expert. I hope you'll find this entertaining and educational. Good afternoon, Big Gun. Good to be talking with you about the area in which you're most known for your expertise as the King of the Versailles variant of diplomacy. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell my audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the interview.
Okay, thanks very much for having me on your YouTube channel, Florida Man. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Big Gun. I play on the diplomacy website playdiplomacy.com, and I've been playing there for more than 5 years now. I came to the game of diplomacy when I was a 12-year-old boy. That's quite a long time ago. And I used to play with my brother, one-to-one diplomacy, just a two-player variant. We rarely had enough players amongst our friends to get 7 together. I played my first tournament when I was 17 years old. That was back in 1982. A live tournament in Birmingham in the UK, which is where I'm from. And after playing in that tournament, I took a 35-year break from playing diplomacy and only came back, as I said, about 5 years ago to play online, and about 3 years ago to start back on the track of playing tournaments, which I enjoy equally well. So Versailles is the variant which we're going to talk about today, and it's my favorite variant. I've had a lot of success playing Versailles online.
All right, we are now looking at the Versailles variant map. Thank you again for agreeing to interview with me, Gun. And why don't you tell me about Versailles?
Okay, so the Versailles variant of diplomacy was invented by a man called Michael Kennedy. He was a diplomacy enthusiast, and he came up with this game which is set in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So the backdrop is Europe, and as we can see from the map here, it's a slightly augmented version of the standard map of diplomacy. Michael's concept was to create the nations, the most important nations, or the powers, let me say, in Europe at the time in 1929, so between the two world wars, so roughly in the middle of the time between the two world wars. So we can see from the map here that there are quite a lot of differences to the standard map of diplomacy. What will strike the standard map player, let me say, immediately is that Austria-Hungary is no longer a major power on this map.
Some people will say that's an improvement.
Sorry?
Some people will say that's an improvement.
Yeah, sure, maybe. I mean, the disadvantage of having a central power is something on the standard board which happens on the Versailles board as well. The Austria-Hungary was, as an empire, was dismantled after the First World War, and so what Michael tried to do here is simply create something that was authentic. And so we have the borders of Germany and other countries as they were in around 1929. Now, Versailles is an intriguing variant because each player controls a major power and a minor power. Now this should become apparent when we look at the multitude of colors on this map, and each color represents either a major or a minor power. Similar to the standard game, we have 4 nations which have the same name and the same appearance. They are France, Germany, Italy and Turkey, and then England becomes Britain in Versailles, and Russia becomes the USSR, and instead of Austria-Hungary as a major power, we have Poland. That's on this map the red-colored country wedged between Germany and the USSR. So each player is assigned a major power and also a minor power. And on the website playdiplomacy.com, these minor powers are assigned randomly. So there is no fixed minor-major pairing. You never know what you're going to get. This random or aleatoric principle makes it a very interesting starting point for when you play this game online, as you might be surprised that your minor power is far away from your major power, or you might be probably more pleasantly surprised if your minor power is close to your major power. So the minor powers on this map are Spain, which we can see different to the standard map, is divided into 3 provinces: Navarra, Catalonia, and Madrid. Madrid is the supply center, and Spain is one of the minor powers. Then we have Sweden in the north, which has Stockholm, the capital city, is the supply center. And then we have the Czechoslovakia in the center of the board, with Prague as the supply center. Then we have to the far southeast Egypt as a minor power, and the supply center is Cairo. And then wedged between Turkey and Italy, the USSR and Poland, we have 3 Balkan powers, 3 minor powers, which are Yugoslavia, Romania, and Greece. As you can see, each minor power has only 1 unit and only 1 supply center, whereas the major powers, as in the standard game, have 3 units and 3 supply centers, and the USSR, like in the standard game, Russia has actually 4 supply centers and 4 units. So that's the map. And Austria and Hungary, of course, still appear on this map, but they are neutral provinces up for grabs for anybody who wants to try to take them. You will notice as well that Switzerland, which in the standard map of diplomacy is impassable, here in this map it's a supply center. So that's basically what Versailles, let me say that the very basics of this variant are about, and that's the map, Doug.
Well, thank you for that excellent overview. How differently would you say Versailles games tend to go as opposed to regular games? How does it change it that you're controlling 2 powers rather than 1, and doing diplomacy on behalf of basically 2 countries?
Sure, that's obviously the major minor powers create quite a different kind of game, let me say, and quite an interesting and more complex way to negotiate, because you are obviously negotiating for your major power and for your minor power. That is one element, let me say, of the game that is different to the standard game. And in addition to that, there are quite a few other nuances which make this variant different. For example, if you look at this map, you will see that the neutral centers, most of them, none of them, very few of them can be seen as, let me say, naturally belonging to one of the major powers, or even the minor powers, let me say. So there is conflict potential around nearly every neutral. Only Portugal belongs to Spain initially and cannot be taken by another country, and Lithuania belongs to Poland, and Holland belongs to Germany. But all other neutral centers are subject to conflict between major and minor powers here. So that's something which is quite different, let me say, to the standard game, where every nation has at least, every power has at least 1 natural neutral center to grab in the first year of the game. Another aspect that makes this variant quite different is the total number of supply centers. So instead of 34 on the standard map, we have here 43 supply centers. Now that number is quite significant because it's an odd number, And that means that in this game, in this variant, the chance of creating a two-way draw is very limited. It's almost impossible. I say almost because there are perhaps one or two ways of doing it, but let me say 43 is not a number divisible by 2. So creating a stalemate between two nations on this map is impossible, let me say. There have to be 3 involved. So many Versailles games go towards either a solo or a draw with 3 or more players. There are very, very, very rarely any two-way draws. And the larger map also lends itself to be a little bit more forgiving than the standard map of diplomacy. So if you make a small error playing Versailles, you can quite easily recover from it. Whereas on the standard map, any small error can cost you the game, irrespective of which nation you're playing, which power you're playing. With Versailles, the map can be a little bit more forgiving. You might go back and forth, lose 1 or 2 centers, win some more centers, back again, and there is more of the back and to and fro with Versailles than on the standard game, I think. Finally, I guess that stalemate lines are an issue for both maps, and most variants have stalemate lines. In Versailles, to my knowledge, there are only 2 major stalemate lines. One is from the north to the south, and the other is from east to west, pretty much horizontally, and both stalemate lines run through Munich, which is the province right in the middle of the board. Not surprisingly, Munich is a province which is heavily contested both at the beginning of the game and throughout the game. And it's also the province that is surrounded by the most number of other provinces, let me say. It's surrounded by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different provinces. So that's a lot for Munich to handle. If you have Munich, that's great. Holding it is very difficult. So those are the major differences, I would say, between the standard game and the Versailles variant.
I see. And how do the minor powers affect that? Does it? I would imagine they would make it harder to form a solid stalemate line if somebody might perhaps have a power somewhere behind it.
Sure. The minor powers, they play a significant role in the game, especially at the beginning of the game, let me say. In the first 2 or 3 game years, the minor powers tend to grow or die very quickly, let me say. If they grow usually only by 1 or 2 centers. It's rare that a minor power ever grows to anything more substantial than that. The reason is very simple, because each of the major powers has its own 3-center, or in the case of USSR, 4-center power base. And so every player considers their major power their first priority. That's quite normal. And so the minor powers are less of a priority and tend to not grow so much. They do, however, have an influence throughout the game as an intriguing kind of additional negotiation force. So depending on which minor power you are assigned, you will probably be negotiating with all of the other powers on this board. And in the standard game, it tends to often run that the West is negotiating between France, England, and Germany. The East is negotiating between Turkey, Austria, and Russia, and Italy is somewhere in between. With Versailles, each major power is far more interested in negotiating with everybody else, because probably your minor power is somewhere else, and so you have interests on the other side of the board too. And that makes for more diplomacy, for more negotiations, for more messaging.
That does sound Does sound very conducive to greater volume of communications. How did you get into Versailles?
Oh, that's easy. That was about 5 years ago when I joined the website and I played a few standard games. And then I saw that the website has more variants to offer. So, amongst others, Versailles. And I had a look at, initially, I was a little bit skeptical when I saw the map. And I thought, well, why not? Give it a shot, give it a try. So, I played a couple of games and enjoyed it. I enjoyed the involvement. It seemed to be more involved, let me say, than the standard game, because of the additional communication that you need to be successful. You need to simply talk more with the other players. And I enjoyed it very much. I enjoy the bigger map, and I also, as a player, tend to want to strive for the solo as opposed to play towards a draw. So I'm more of a romantic player, let me say, who really believes that soloing is winning. And the Versailles board, in my opinion, lends itself more to the opportunity for players to solo. And as I said, the two-way draw is pretty much out of the question. So soloing or then stopping a soloist, that tends to be the way this game goes down. And so that's how I got into it. I started playing a few games of Versailles, and then it kind of like grew on me. I enjoyed it very much, and in the meantime, it's pretty much the only variant that I'll play on the website. I don't play the standard game very often or any of the other variants, but I love playing Versailles.
That's very cool, especially because, as I think I mentioned earlier, a lot of people know you as the King of Versailles. What would you say made you so good at this particular variant that you can justly be called the king?
Well, it's very complimentary of you to say that, Florida man, and I appreciate the sentiment. I guess that to be successful in Versailles, you need to understand the board very well. You need to understand the different provinces and which way to go, how to play each individual country. So not really dissimilar to the standard game. As a player, the skills that you need are pretty much the same. You need to be able to talk well, you need to be convincing, you need to build trust with your allies, and if you want to succeed in solo, then you need to obviously stab at the right moment and take your chances to try and reach the 22 centers. I find that Versailles lends itself very well to two-way alliances as opposed to three- or four-way alliances. So I recommend looking at the map and just making a clear decision after initial consultation, initial negotiations with the other players, making a clear decision on who you want to work with. And perhaps initially it will be two or three other nations, and then you will decide later on in the mid-game which of those becomes your partner in crime, so to speak, that you take towards the end of the game, towards the end game. And I find that a very successful way of playing this map is to then have one partner who is kind of like second violin. If you want to win and be the first violin, the soloist, so to speak, then you need a second violin to carry you along and cause distraction towards the other players. Versailles is also great for people who like to try to solo because of the plethora of different nations involved, the majors and the minors. It means that the board is, in some ways, could be described as being in chaos. And for anybody who wants to solo, creating chaos is a good way of doing it. So I guess there's nothing there that I've said that is out of the ordinary or could not be transferred to the standard game. Let me say the only difference being, let me say, this bunch of minor countries dotted around the map, and the slightly bigger map with more supply centers to grab.
Interesting points. Any particular tips for playing specific countries on this map?
That's a good question, and I guess yes. There are some. Let me say there are some countries on this map which are easier to play, and some which are more difficult to play. It's the same on the standard map, of course. Yeah, but you can win with any of these major nations. But with some of them, it's harder, let me say. Surprisingly, the country that I personally find the most difficult country to deal with playing on Versailles, the most difficult country is Germany. So Germany, as we can see, is surrounded by a lot of potential enemies. So obviously France, Poland and Britain as the major threats, let me say, and potentially also Italy, who could go north. And then there is also the minor Czech, Prague, who is sitting very close to Munich, and the minor nation Sweden, Stockholm, who can block Germany from taking Denmark. So Germany has a hard time in Versailles, and it's my least favorite country to play on this map, let me say. France and Turkey, surprisingly, also are tricky nations to play on the Versailles map. Turkey, again, is surrounded by potential enemies and has 1, 2, 3 Balkan nations and Egypt, who might all be anti-Turkish, and with the big bear of the USSR sitting to the north. So Turkey has a hard time. France also has a difficult position with Spain in his backside, so to speak, nudging there. And if France's minor is not Spain, then he clearly needs to decide whether he's going to attack Spain or he's going to befriend Spain and work with Spain. So, and that makes France's position far more tricky than on the standard map, let me say.
Yeah.
The corner nations are less effective, let me say, than on the standard map as sure winners, so to speak. So France and Britain, to a certain extent, has an easier start, let me say. Ireland usually falls to Britain, and Oslo, which is Norway, also. So Britain can get to 5. On the standard map, that's often tricky for Britain to get beyond for England to get beyond the 4th dot. And so Britain has slightly better position, let me say, than in this variant. Personally, I think that Poland, Italy, the USSR, and Britain are the 4 strongest nations on this map. Surprisingly, Italy has good chances of getting to 5 dots in the first year, with Tunisia and then potentially Austria as well. And Poland, which looks geographically also as if it's surrounded, it can be a very, very successful country. Poland and USSR never really have a long-term relationship in this game. Sometimes I have seen and also played allies between Poland and USSR. However, I don't think that if you want to solo, that kind of alliance is so very helpful long term. It's either or. So if you're Poland, eventually you simply have to attack the USSR and secure your backyard, and vice versa. If you're USSR, you don't want Poland growing too large. In fact, as USSR, Poland is directly in your path westwards, and so you want to be taking those juicy Polish centers away from him if you can.
Yes.
Poland is my favorite country to play on this map, and I've had numerous successes and solos playing as Poland, lulling USSR into a sense of security, let me say, from the outset, and only stabbing in perhaps the second or even third year to achieve that corner of the map, and then with additional supply centers then sweeping west. So I think Poland is a great country to play, and can and should perhaps even be considered to have the same potential as any corner power.
That's an interesting point. I have found that Poland can be a pretty formidable power on this map, to my surprise, but I think it's partially because Germany usually has so much to deal with that Germany is not terribly likely to invade Poland early on, and the USSR might not have sufficient strength to attack Poland early on. So seeing as then there's only the unit in Prague to worry about, Poland is in a pretty good position to expand.
Right. Yes, and Italy also can be very successful on this map, and there's a long history of Italian solos on the website playdiplomacy.com in Versailles, and we know that Italy on the online does not fare very well with solos in the standard game, but in Versailles it does. It has a very good, strong position, and depending on the pairing with the minor, if Italy has any of five of the seven minors, so Spain, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Greece, or Egypt, any of those five minors as its secondary power, then Italy has fantastic chances to make its mark in the Med. I did mention the stalemate lines a few months ago, and Italy is cursed, unfortunately, in this variant as often getting to 20 supply centers, so only 2 away from the solo, and being cursed by the east to west, let me say, stalemate line that can stop Italy from reaching that goal. Yeah.
Yes, I see. Have you found that Turkey can do better than you've been describing if it has one of those 4 minor powers that are near it as a minor?
Absolutely. If Turkey has one of those 4, then he's also in a better position, let me say, to make his mark on this map. Yeah, but not necessarily. It very much depends on who the other minor powers belong to. But accommodation in particular, if Turkey's initial year 1 problem is to win any center at all. So if you look at the map in the south, Turkey should strive to achieve Syria. But if Egypt is anti-Turkish, then Egypt will simply send his fleet to Syria and bounce Turkey forevermore. That often happens. Then Turkey needs to try to get Bulgaria. However, Bulgaria borders Yugoslavia and Romania, both of whom could prevent, and often do prevent, Turkey from winning Bulgaria. So Turkey is often stuck on 3 units and cannot get out of his corner, and that's an unfortunate thing, unfortunate place to be for Turkey. So if Turkey has one of those nations, then, for example, Egypt, he can send then the Egyptian fleet westwards to contest Tunisia and take Syria and guarantee himself a first build, or he can support himself to Bulgaria if he has Yugoslavia or Romania. And that is usually the best way for Turkey to make his mark. Turkey is in a difficult position if his minor is not one of those 4 Balkan nations, or the 3 Balkan nations and Egypt. Yeah.
Yes, I certainly see that. What alliances would you say are particularly common on this map, or particularly potent?
Right, that's a good question, and obviously the minors play a role there. But if we disregard them for a moment and just take the major powers, then the alliances are pretty much similar to the kind of alliances you would expect to have in the standard game. Only that obviously Poland now is there instead of Austria-Hungary, so Poland plays a different role. Very often you have an agreement between Poland and Germany not to fight in the first year, and that's very wise for both nations if they can agree not to fight, as they are both surrounded by potential enemies. And Polish-German alliance only really lasts as long as they both survive, let me say. And other alliances quite typical are a French-British alliance, or the French-German alliance, or German-British alliance in the West. Italy can go with anybody, really. Italy is in a clever position on this map, and unlikely on the standard map that Italy is going to ally with Turkey, let me say there. Obviously it happens, but they're more likely on the standard game, to have conflict. And here I've seen strong alliances between Italy and Turkey on the Versailles map, which can be effective, let me say. Russia-Turkey, in my opinion, is the strongest alliance on this map, or USSR Turkey, I should say, because basically they really have nobody behind them who might be a thorn in their sides and can effectively sweep from east to west. Whereas France, as I've said before, France has Spain in his rear, who might cause problems. So the Turkish USSR alliance can be really, really very effective. And they're playing either Turkey or USSR. It obviously depends on who is the swifter of the two players to make gains. Who will then, at the end of the game, prevail and solo. None of the nations on this board is unplayable. As I said, Germany is perhaps the trickiest, but is still playable. If Germany has Sweden or the Czech or Czechoslovakia as its minor, or even Spain, let me say, then Germany is also in a good position to make its mark, and even solo. So all alliances are possible on this map, and as I said, the only one that I believe doesn't have a long-term perspective is Poland-USSR.
Interesting, and I think very good points all around. Would you say that this map is more balanced than the classic diplomacy map?
That's a very good question, Florida man. More balanced. It depends how you define balance, really. So, what do you mean by more balanced?
Would you say that the odds of the various powers winning are closer to equal, because this map has sort of neutered France, which normally has some pretty significant early advantages, and has also, we see, given USSR a formidable neighbor in Poland, which Russia also had kind of an elevated chance of winning in the classic map. This map has elevated Italy as well, which normally has quite tenuous chances, I think.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I guess you could say that, but the balance is always relative. I suppose you could say that Italy has stronger chances here for sure than on the standard board. France has less chance. Let me say, Turkey has less chance, and certainly Germany does. But balance, I find it always very difficult to judge what is balance in the game of diplomacy. Balance depends on, not, in my opinion, on the map, or even on the structure of the map, the provinces and so on. In that respect, I think this has the same balance as the standard map. And each power has the chance to get neutrals, each power has the chance to grow. Balance is, for me, more of a question of the players themselves. So if I am a strong player, I can play on any map and win or make a good mark. If I'm a weak player or a new player, then I have a much more challenging time. So saying, okay, USSR is a strong country to play on this map is very relative. If the player who is inexperienced and doesn't know how to handle USSR, then he will fall quickly. And so let me say balance is, in diplomacy, is always relative to the player's experience.
I see. That makes a lot of sense to me. It was interesting to me, though, that you mentioned earlier that the Soviet-Turkish alliance on this map was, in your opinion, probably about the strongest. That suggests to me that maybe this map isn't so different from the standard map anyway.
Correct. I think that's a good way of seeing it, Florida Man. Yeah, it's a juggernaut, and it's often slightly stilted at the beginning, as Turkey, as we've mentioned, has initial teething problems of getting out of his corner. But once those are resolved, then the juggernaut on this map is very difficult to stop.
Yes, I can see that. Do you have any secrets of succeeding at Versailles that you'd be willing to share with my audience?
So that I could be dethroned from my crown, yes?
Oh, no.
I do believe that there are no super secrets here to this map that are not hidden on the standard map as well. Let me say the secrets to winning at diplomacy have been discussed for decades, and the actual techniques that lead to a solo are the same here. So, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, building trust is obviously vitally important. Building trust with one partner can be very effective if you can lead that partner on to believe that you are seriously interested in a two-way draw, and that partner actually thinks that that's possible. I did mention that a two-way draw could theoretically happen. It only happens if the other nations agree to it. Or in online play, sometimes we have players who surrender. So if at the end of the game there are just two players and a third player involved, and that third player surrenders, then the two players might agree out of solidarity to a two-way draw. But let me say, stringing along another player to make that player believe that you are genuinely interested in a two-way draw is an effective technique, and that's used obviously in the standard game a lot too.
Yeah.
I think with Versailles, though, there is perhaps one thing that I can say that from experience that can lead to a solo here is judging the right time to go for it. Now, on the standard map, you obviously can see when somebody's on 10 or 12 centers and they're going in the direction of a solo. And it's often the case then that the rest of the board will turn against that player to prevent the solo from happening. With Versailles, the journey is not to 18 centers, but to 22. So it's quite a little bit longer, let me say, and more difficult to achieve. So when a player gets to 10 or 12 centers, the other players are not necessarily too worried about this situation. And so sometimes it's quite good in this game to play, let me say, initially aggressively and get up to 8, 10 centers, and then sneakily just grow very slowly to 12, 13, 14 centers. And once you hit 16, that's the time where you need to be in a position to stab your ally and take at least 2 or perhaps 3 of his centers to move you to 18 or 19, which makes your position then pretty much unstoppable and gives you the chance to solo. Once you have 18, 19, it's very, very hard to stop that player from soloing, especially if there are still 2, 3, even 4 other players involved in the game and they have to coordinate their orders. And so the soloist benefits from the fact that there is some chaos still on the board, maybe some animosity between the 2, 3, 4 other players who are still playing, and they have to bury their differences and work together to stop the soloist. So finding that right moment to stab your ally is extremely important here in Versailles to be successful. As I said, there is no point in stabbing your ally when you're on 12 or 13 centers because you will not solo. The key is to get up to, let me say 16 is in my experience the number you need. And once you're on 16, you need to have built enough trust to your ally that he is exposed and you are in a position to drop 2 or 3 bombs on his centers in order to win the day. That's probably the best tip I can give from my experience, and yeah, I hope that helps.
Well, I certainly appreciate that.
Okay.
I'm sure
I'll watch out for you next time we play together.
I wouldn't do that.
Okay. So I hope anyway that I guess we're going through with Versailles, introducing Versailles now as a variant, and I hope that these ideas and concepts will animate players to try this variant, especially on our website playdiplomacy.com. It's an exciting variant, and I can only recommend it, and I look forward to playing against new players all the time. And there are some really classy players out there who know this board really well and who are excellent Versailles players, and we need more of them.
I agree. So, Gun, you've given us a lot to think about the Versailles map and how it is similar and also different from the classic diplomacy map. Why don't you tell us some more about minor powers and the effect of being secretly assigned a second country to control?
Right, and that is an important issue in this game, as when you play this game online, you receive your major power, and the minor powers, nobody knows who is who. So that brings an added element of suspense to the game right from the start, because part of the playing the game is to try to guess who has which minor. Now, there are various ways of going about this, and players tend to not like to reveal their minors, at least in the first game year. This is something, when you reveal your minor and when you don't, it depends on many different things. But let me say there are some signs that players give sometimes, which makes it sometimes very obvious who has which minor. For example, sometimes players in the online world, they will send messages from their major and their minor at exactly the same time of the day. So you might receive a message from, let's say, Russia, and then 2 minutes later you receive a message from Yugoslavia. So that seems then pretty obvious that they might be the same player. It's very likely. Sometimes players write in exactly the same style as well. They'll write you a message saying, for example, if you're Germany, "Dear Kaiser," and that's the way they'll open their message. And they will do the same from their minor as well. So if you receive 2 Dear Kaisers, then it's very likely, let me say, that the major and minor players addressing you could be the same player. So there are signals there, especially inexperienced players will simply fire off messages at the same time of the day. But those who are a little bit more wily will perhaps not do that. And then you have to try and figure out, well, who could be who? Sometimes it becomes clear from the opening moves. For example, if we look at the map here, let's say Turkey and Egypt are the same player. So Turkey is the turquoise, and Egypt here down at the bottom is kind of like a pale orange. And if they're the same player, the minor being Egypt, the major being Turkey, then Egypt is more likely to open to Libya. He won't spoil Turkey's chance at getting Syria as a neutral, but is more likely to want to challenge Italy for Tunisia by ordering Cairo to Libya. So that's another example. Such an opening makes it pretty certain that Turkey and Egypt are the same player. Otherwise, Egypt would have every interest, in actual fact, in stopping Turkey in advancing, and would be trying to block Turkey from taking Syria. Yeah. So there's another way. Sometimes it's possible to see that a player will use his minor to support his major, or vice versa. If that happens, like in the first game year or so, then it could be that they're the same player. It's not absolutely sure. Right. You can never know absolutely sure, but that it could be the case. For example, if Czechoslovakia, Prague supports the Italian unit Trieste to Austria, then it could be that the Czechoslovakia is Italy's minor. So these are signals, let me say, that that give us clues to who could be who. What happens then with this secrecy? I mean, obviously, in messaging between players, the secrecy issue is ideal to create lots of subterfuge between players. And by not revealing your minor initially, you hold back information, and the other players are doing the same. You hold back information that could be valuable. You could barter the identity of your minor for some other information. That can be a useful thing to do. There are two issues about when to reveal your minor. I think one of the most important issues is your minor in a position to help you, help your major immediately, or within the realm or sphere of influence of your major. For example, Poland. Poland is in the middle of the map. If Poland has Sweden as his minor, or Romania as his minor, either or, then Poland is in an excellent position to attack Russia from the start. And so obviously should not let Russia know that his minor is Sweden or Romania. That would be disastrous. And also should not let anybody else know his minor, because another player might tell Russia and say, watch out, Poland has Sweden, and watch out, Poland has Romania. So if your minor is in a great position to help you attack a neighboring country, then you should definitely try to keep the secrecy there for as long as possible, until you can make use of the ideal position that you have. And then the opposite, Florida Man, and you and I, we've played Versailles many times together before, and I think one of the things that helps us both get along in this game is building trust. Sometimes it's great to reveal your minor early on, right?
Yes.
That will help you trust the player telling you their minor.
And often, if the player you're speaking to is someone who's closer to your minor than you are, you might want to reveal your minor to them for the safety of your miner, and so you can coordinate with them through the miner.
Absolutely. They might be on the other side of the board, and that might be useful to keep your miner alive, or you can offer your miner as quasi as a janissary to support another nation's major power. If your miner, for example, is in the Balkans, sometimes the Balkan miners work together, 2 or even 3, to go, for example, against Turkey. That's often a common play in this game. So I would say that what you can consider when you're playing this game as when your miner is far, far away from your major, then you have really nothing much to lose by revealing the information of who your miner is. So, for example, if I'm playing Britain and my miner is Greece, and I want to, for example, convince France to join me in an alliance, a French-British alliance, then I might offer France to exchange miners from the outset, and I have nothing to lose by telling France, okay, my miner is Greece, because Greece is so far away, and it can have no possible negative effect on that relationship between Britain and France. However, if my miner is Spain and I'm playing Britain, I might decide, well, that gives me a great position actually to attack France in a kind of a pincer position, because I have France, the southern flank with Madrid, and then perhaps Portugal with 2 units. From Spain, I can attack France. So I certainly wouldn't want to inform France about my miner, unless, and here again there's always an exception to every rule, unless France is a much better communicator and a much more ideal partner for me than, let me say, Germany. In that case, I might say, okay, France, we have a problem here because my miner is Spain, but I really want to work with you, so I will build fleets and send them eastwards towards Italy, rather than attack you, and then I might decide, okay, to work with France as he is the better communicator. So that obviously still plays a role too. Usually the identities of miners and who owns which miner, that's the kind of information that tends to come out slowly but surely in the first 2 or maximum 3 game years. So the secrecy is an important element in the first stages of the game, but then after sometimes you might not know for sure all of the identities, but through a process of elimination, you can pretty much guess them after 2 or 3 game years. Yeah. And then the secrecy element, of course, goes away. So, yeah, do you have anything to add there, Florida Man?
I was just going to say that for those players who might be trying to keep their miners secret and not exchanging information about miners with others, I think it could become a significant disadvantage if other people have, by trading information and trying to deduce the identities of the miners, have been sharing this intelligence, and so they have a good idea of who your miner is without you having had to tell anyone who your miner was. And ultimately, you're in the dark, and everyone else knows something that you do not.
Correct. So, that's absolutely a good point, because in that case, if you then start denying who your miner is, then people are simply not going to trust you. And that can be very detrimental to your position in the game. So yeah, this major minor secrecy issue is great. That's exhilarating in the Versailles game, because that creates such suspense and such excitement in the first stages of the game, and that's something that makes this variant so completely different to most other variants that are around.
I've never seen anything like it in any other variant of diplomacy.
Right.
It can be pretty exciting.
Right, and it's a simple concept really to have a major and a minor country. There are many variants that include ultra complicated rules, much bigger maps, different kinds of units, different strengths of units, and all sorts of additional complexities, which Versailles doesn't have. Versailles is a great variant for the kind of player who perhaps, with respect, is getting a little bored of the standard map and the limitations of the standard map, would like to expand without having to learn a lot of new rules.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. Yeah, Versailles throws a real twist into the traditional style of gameplay. And I think in some ways it might even be more realistic because of the fact that in real life, no major power is without allies. You know, large countries will have smaller countries that are kind of under their umbrella of protection and that probably are taking their cues on foreign policy from their patron.
Absolutely, that's right. And that's reflected in this variant very well, I think. Yeah. We did talk earlier a little bit about balance in the game, and obviously the selection or the random allocation of minors to majors can cause an imbalance in the game. So obviously a country who a major power who has a minor power very close to their territory and can use both powers together is in a better position and a stronger position from the outset than a major power where the minor is very, very far away. So that does cause some imbalance in the game, for sure.
Yes, I think that there are some majors that are disadvantaged by being far away from most of the minors, like Britain, and there's at least one minor in my mind that's generally not very strong unless it's specifically paired with one specific major, and that's Greece. And I think it's almost useless unless it's paired with Italy, and sometimes with Turkey.
Yes, I would agree with that, yes. And Greece, unfortunately, starts out with an army in this game, and I question sometimes whether that's so wise a choice of a unit, as Greece has only two spaces it can go with its army, Albania or Thessaly, and it could equally have a fleet and have two choices there, and mix up the game quite a lot more if it has a fleet that threatens, perhaps, for example, to go to the Ionian in the first game season and cause stress, perhaps, for Italy.
I agree. I think the only excuse for that being an army rather than a fleet is just that Turkey is already looking very besieged in this variant, and giving Greece a fleet as well would probably mean that Turkey is eliminated in the first several game years more often than not.
Yes, maybe so, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and most of the miners seem to die out after a few game years. Spain and Sweden tend to be the ones that hang around a little bit longer. Yugoslavia sometimes manages to live a while, especially if paired with Italy. But the miners' influence on the game certainly decreases after a while.
Yes. Any other insights you would like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
Sure. Well, I would just like to say, first of all, thank you, Florida Man, for inviting me to join you on your YouTube channel today. And I hope that describing this variant, Versailles, is interesting for some of your viewers. And they will, after watching this, want to get involved in playing this game. It's a very exciting variant. I would say it's the suspense that the variant brings is really, really something that players who've never tried variants would really enjoy and like to get into. and it's simply fun. And that's the point. That's why we play this game. Versailles is a really fun variant, and so I would like to encourage players who've never tried it to get involved and join a game and try it out and see how it goes. And that's it. And I look forward to seeing you as well, Florida Ban, across the board one day again soon on the Versailles map.
Yes, I look forward to meeting you in a divided Europe sometime soon. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, I hope you'll like and subscribe and comment below about your experiences with variants. Until next time, Florida Man out.